Deluded fishing trip friend blabbed about his wife's secret fear to the whole group and called her a baby for being hurt about his jokes. Now he wonders why his wife is distant and turns to Reddit for advice to reconcile. I'll never forget that weekend. My name is Zach. I'm 34, and I live in Birmingham, Alabama. I've been looking forward to that fishing trip for weeks, a chance to just get out of town, hang out with my buddies, and forget about work and bills for a while. Nate drove us up in his old Ford pickup. It rattled the whole way there, but it didn't matter. Nate was always the life of the party, and Chris and I just followed his lead. We rolled down the windows and cranked up some Tom Petty, and by the time we pulled up to the cabin by the lake, we were all in a pretty good mood. The first evening was perfect. We cracked open some beers and set up our rods on the dock, the sun dipping low behind the trees. Nate was telling one of his usual dating stories, making Chris and me laugh so hard we almost forgot about the fishing altogether. So get this, Nate said, holding his beer like it was part of the performance. This girl I was seeing freaked out because I didn't text her back for like 4 hours. She thought I was ghosting her. Chris nearly spit out his beer. Dude, what did you say to her? Nate just shrugged and grinned. I told her I was taking a nap, but she didn't buy it. Women, man, we all laughed. It was the kind of conversation that felt so easy, so harmless. I should have known better than to open my mouth after that. I took a long swig of my beer and leaned back in my chair, feeling the warm buzz in my veins. That's nothing, I said, without really thinking. Elena's got this crazy thing about spiders. She can't even look at them without freaking out. Nate's eyes lit up like he'd just discovered gold. Wait, really? Like, full-on meltdown? He asked. I laughed, feeling a little embarrassed but also like I was in on the joke. Yeah, she'll jump on a chair or something. It's ridiculous. Chris hooped and raised his beer. To Elena and her mortal enemy, the spider, he said, and we all clinked bottles. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was just another round of banter, another stupid story to pass the time. Nate couldn't let it go, though. Every time the conversation slowed down, he'd circle back to it. Careful, Zach, he said later, grinning as he reeled in an empty line. Better not let a spider show up or your wife might just move out. Even Chris jumped in. You're gonna have to start screening your fishing spots for webs, man, he said, laughing like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. I laughed along, even though a little knot of guilt had started to form in my stomach. I tried to brush it off. After all, what was the harm? We were just guys messing around. Elena would probably laugh about it too, right? That night, sitting around the fire pit, Nate took it up a notch. He did this whole dramatic reenactment of Elena seeing a spider, screaming, flailing, running away. Chris was in stitches, slapping his knee like he couldn't breathe. Come on, man, I said, half laughing, half wanting him to stop. Don't make her sound crazy. Oh, lighten up, Nate said, still grinning. It's just a story. You gotta admit, it's hilarious. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to ruin the vibe, didn't want to be the guy who couldn't take a joke. So I just forced a smile and let them keep going. The next morning, packing up our gear, I kept thinking about it. Nate was still chuckling to himself, and Chris gave me a slap on the back as we loaded up the truck. Man, that story's gonna go down in history, he said, shaking his head. Per Elena. I laughed along, but it didn't feel the same. In that quiet moment, as we pulled out of the cabin driveway, I realized I'd crossed a line. I'd turned something that was supposed to stay between Elena and me into a punchline for the guys, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd messed up, even if I didn't know just how bad it was yet. The morning after the trip, I felt like I was still half on that dock, half in my kitchen. I woke up early, the smell of coffee already filling the house. Elena was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone and humming to herself. She looked up when I walked in and gave me a tired smile. Morning, she said. I leaned down and kissed the top of her head. Morning. I was trying to play it cool, like everything was normal, but my mind was still replaying that fishing trip. Nate's voice echoing in my ears, Chris's laughter. I kept telling myself it was no big deal, just a harmless story, but something in my gut was tight, like I knew I'd messed up but couldn't admit it yet. I started making breakfast, eggs and toast, the usual Sunday routine. Elena sat there in her oversized sweater, legs crossed, looking peaceful. It was such a stark contrast to the chaos of the guys' trip. So she said after a minute, her eyes soft. Did you have fun? Yeah, I said, flipping the eggs. It was a good trip. Relaxing. Stupid jokes, you know. She chuckled. I'm glad. You needed that. I hesitated for a second, then decided to just get it out. I figured if I told her casually, she'd laugh about it too. Actually, there was this one funny moment, I said, trying to keep my voice light. Nate was going on about his crazy ex-girlfriend and how she used to freak out about nothing, and I kind of told them about how you freak out over spiders. She looked up, her smile fading a bit. You, what? It wasn't a big deal, I said quickly, cracking the eggs a little harder than I meant to. I just said how you're scared of spiders. They thought it was funny. Elena's lips pressed into a thin line. You told them about that? Yeah, but it was just... I paused, trying to find the words. It was just a dumb story. You know how it is with those guys. We were just messing around. She didn't say anything for a moment. She set her phone down slowly, the screen going dark as she looked at me. Zach, that's not something I wanted you to share. I felt my stomach drop. Come on, Elena. It wasn't like I was making fun of you. We were just joking around. But you were, she said, her voice quiet but steady. You took something I trusted you with, something that makes me feel small, and you turned it into a joke for your friends. I didn't know what to say. The eggs were burning, but I didn't care. My face felt hot. It was harmless. I tried again, my voice almost pleading. They were just laughing. I'm sure they were, she said, her eyes going distant. I just can't believe you thought I'd find that funny. I shut off the burner and pushed the pan to the side. Elena, I didn't mean to hurt you. I swear. She stood up, not looking at me. I need a minute, she said, her voice tight. She pushed her chair back and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there with the half-cooked eggs and the smell of burnt toast filling the air. I wanted to follow her, to explain that it didn't mean anything, that it was just a slip, but I couldn't make myself move. My hands were shaking, and all I could think about was how fast her smile had vanished, how I'd thought it was all just a stupid story, but to her, it was so much more. I stood there for a long time, waiting for her to come back, but she didn't. I cleaned up the eggs, trying to convince myself it would blow over, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple, and for the first time, I wondered if my need to make people laugh had finally crossed a line I couldn't take back. The next few days at home felt like I was walking on broken glass. Elena barely looked at me, her face like a closed door every time I tried to say something. She didn't yell, she didn't cry, she just shut down completely. And somehow, that silence was worse than any argument. She started sleeping in the guest room. The first night I found her pillow and blanket missing from our bed. I just stood there in the doorway, staring at the empty space beside me. I wanted to go in there, to ask her to talk to me, but I couldn't find the words. I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal. People overshare sometimes, right? Everyone does it, but that didn't make it feel any better. Every morning, she'd come out of the guest room already dressed for work, her hair up and her face set in that same distant expression. She'd say, "Morning," but it sounded hollow, like she was just going through the motions. I'd try to joke around, maybe ask if she wanted coffee, but she'd just nod or shake her head and keep moving, like I was part of the furniture, something to step around on the way to the door. At night, I'd sit on the couch, flipping through channels I wasn't even watching. I'd hear her moving around in the guest room, the soft thump of drawers opening, the creak of the bed. I'd think about getting up, knocking on the door, but then I'd tell myself to leave her alone. She needed space, right? That's what I kept telling myself. But deep down, I knew I was just scared of what she'd say if I pushed too hard. In those long, silent evenings, my mind kept drifting back to the fishing trip. I kept seeing Nate smirk, the way Chris slapped his knee, and how I laughed along like it was all harmless fun. The way I'd brushed off that tiny voice in my head that said, "Hey, maybe this isn't yours to share." I started resenting the way the silence ate at everything. The house felt cold and stiff, like we were both living in some kind of waiting room. I'd find little signs of her in the guest room, her sweater draped over the armchair, her perfume on the dresser, and it felt like a slap every time. Like she'd built this tiny new world that didn't include me. But the worst part? I kept wanting to blame her for overreacting. I'd think, why can't she just let this go? It was one dumb story. I'd stand in the kitchen, hands on the counter, and tell myself I hadn't meant to hurt her, that it was just a joke. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that was just me protecting my own ego. Deep down, I knew exactly what I'd done. I'd taken something that was hers, something she'd trusted me with, and turned it into cheap laughs for the guys. And now, I was living in the fallout. One night, about a week after she moved into the guest room, I found myself standing outside the door, hand half raised to knock. I could hear her in there, the quiet rustle of the sheets, the soft sound of her breathing. I thought about opening the door, about saying, "I'm sorry," and really meaning it. But I didn't. I just stood there like a coward, and then turned away. In the darkness of the living room, I flopped down on the couch and closed my eyes. My thoughts circled the same loop over and over. Why did I do it? Why didn't I see how much it would hurt her? But the answers never came. Just the heavy silence, pressing down on me like a weight. A week later, we went to my sister's house for her annual Sunday dinner. It was the kind of thing we always went to. No matter what was going on, a routine, a tradition. I thought maybe it would be good for us, a way to break the ice and slip back into normal. But the second we stepped into the kitchen, I could feel how wrong I was. Elena was quiet the whole ride over, staring out the window like she didn't want to see me. When we walked in, my sister, Lydia, was bustling around, pulling dishes out of the oven and shooing her kids away from the cookies on the counter. She greeted us with a smile and a hug, but even she seemed to sense that something was off. We settled in at the big oak table, passing around plates and making small talk. The kids were running around, the dog was barking at every little noise, and it almost felt like nothing had changed. Almost. Lydia tried to keep the conversation light. She asked Elena about work, about a book she'd been reading, but Elena's answers were clipped and careful. She didn't meet my eyes once. My dad, who always thought silence meant a problem, kept trying to fill the gaps with small talk. "So, Zach, how was the fishing trip?" he asked, a forced cheer in his voice. I felt a flush crawl up my neck. "It was good," I said, reaching for the mashed potatoes. "Just some guys hanging out." Nate's joke about Elena and the spider story was the last thing I wanted to think about, let alone mention. But apparently, I didn't have to. My sister had heard something. She always did. "So, Elena," Lydia said with a sly smile, "did Zach tell you about the spider thing? He was going on about how you practically jumped out of your skin. He made it sound hilarious." Elena's fork froze halfway to her mouth. For a second, she looked like she might laugh it off, but then her eyes flicked to mine, and I saw how hurt she was. Like she just realized the joke wasn't staying behind closed doors. "I didn't know you'd share that with everyone," she said softly. Her voice was so low, but it cut through the chatter at the table like a knife. Lydia, oblivious, laughed. "Oh, come on. It's just a funny story. You should have seen the guys, Elena, they were howling." Poor Zach was trying to keep up with them. Elena's eyes widened. I saw the way her shoulders tensed, how her face went pale. She didn't say a word, just pushed her chair back and stood up. "Excuse me," she said, and she turned and walked to the bathroom, shutting the door behind her. The table went quiet. My dad shifted in his seat, giving me that look like, "Fix this." My mom tried to smooth it over, saying something about how Elena was probably just tired, but I couldn't focus on any of it. My ears were ringing, and all I could think about was how I'd let this become more than just a fishing trip joke. It was out there now, bouncing around like a ball I couldn't catch. I wanted to go after her, but I felt rooted to my chair. My hands were shaking under the table. Lydia was staring at me, her smile gone. "I didn't realize it was that big of a deal," she said, her voice small. "It wasn't supposed to be," I mumbled, but that didn't change the fact that it was, that I'd let it get this far. We all sat there in awkward silence, the kids' laughter from the living room feeling like it belonged in another world. My mom cleared her throat and started talking about the weather, trying to fill the void, but no one was really listening. After a few minutes, I got up and walked down the hall to the bathroom door. I stood there, my hand hovering over the doorknob, but I couldn't bring myself to knock. I could hear her in there, moving around, the water running. She didn't want to see me. I knew that, and honestly, I didn't blame her. I went back to the table, feeling exposed and ashamed. Everyone tried to act normal, passing around the rolls and making polite conversation, but it was all just noise. I kept my eyes on my plate, my appetite gone. All I could think about was the look on Elena's face when she realized the whole family was laughing at something she'd trusted me to keep between us. I thought I was just sharing a harmless story, but now I saw it for what it really was, a betrayal, and I couldn't take it back. That night, after the kids had gone home and the dishes were done, I found Elena sitting on the edge of our bed, her arms folded tight across her chest. The bedroom was dark except for the soft glow of the lamp on our nightstand. She didn't look up when I walked in. I shut the door behind me and took a deep breath. My chest was tight, and I felt like I was about to step onto a landmine. "Elena," I said, my voice low. "Can we talk?" She didn't answer right away. She just stared at the floor, her lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, she looked up at me. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "Talk," she said, her tone flat. I shifted my weight from foot to foot, feeling like a kid caught doing something he shouldn't have. "I know I messed up," I started. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just what, Zach?" She cut in. "Just thought it was funny? Just didn't think it mattered." I swallowed. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. It was just a story, yeah. "It was my story," she said, her voice rising. "My fear, my vulnerability. And you turned it into a punchline for your friends, for my family." I felt my stomach drop. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand. Nate and Chris, they just kept running with it. And you what?" she demanded. "You just let them?" "You laughed along." I opened my mouth to say something, but the words caught in my throat. I didn't know how to tell her that in that moment. I'd wanted so badly to fit in with them, to be the guy who could take a joke, who wasn't too sensitive, and I'd chosen that over her trust. She stood up, her arms dropping to her sides. You don't get it, Zach. It's not just about the joke. It's about how you didn't think twice before sharing it. How you didn't even consider how it would make me feel. I thought you'd understand, I said weakly. It wasn't about making fun of you. It was just something to fill the silence. She let out a bitter laugh. Well, so my private fear was just filler to keep your friends entertained. My face burned. I didn't see it like that. That's the problem, she said, her voice breaking. You didn't see me. You didn't see how small and stupid it would make me feel to know everyone's laughing at me. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I took a step closer, but she backed away. Elena, I'm sorry, I said. I really am. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't think. No, you didn't, she said sharply. You didn't think about me at all. You just thought about yourself and how to be the funny guy in the group. She turned away, her shoulders shaking. You keep saying it wasn't a big deal. But if it wasn't a big deal, why do you keep trying to defend it? Why can't you just say you were wrong? I stood there, my mouth open but no words coming out. Because deep down, I knew she was right. I'd been so wrapped up in trying to justify myself, to make it seem like it was harmless, that I hadn't actually listened to what she was saying. I'd been more worried about not feeling like a bad guy than about how much I'd hurt her. She wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. You betrayed me, Zach. I trusted you with that, and you turned it into something for everyone else to laugh at. I don't know how to come back from that. The weight of her words settled on me like a lead blanket. My throat was dry, and I felt a sting in my own eyes. I'm sorry, I said again, but it sounded hollow even to me. She shook her head, her voice trembling but firm. I need you to really think about why you did this. Not just to say you're sorry, but to understand what it cost me. I nodded, feeling like I'd finally woken up to just how badly I'd messed up. I will, I said quietly. I promise. She didn't answer. She just turned away and climbed into the guest bed, pulling the covers up around her. I stood there for a moment longer, then walked out and closed the door behind me. I went downstairs and sat on the couch in the dark, my heart thudding in my chest. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about a stupid story or a joke that went too far. It was about the way I'd failed to protect the one person who trusted me most. And no matter how many times I said, I'm sorry, I knew that wouldn't be enough to fix it. The next few days were the hardest. Elena didn't move back into our bedroom. She stayed in the guest room, and every night, I could hear her moving around in there, her footsteps soft but final. I didn't even try to join her anymore. I knew she needed the space, but every time I saw that closed door, it felt like another nail in the coffin. I started sleeping on the couch. It wasn't comfortable, but I told myself I deserved it. Lying there in the dark, I couldn't stop replaying the fishing trip in my head. Nate's jokes, Chris's laughter, it all sounded so different now. Every laugh felt like a slap, and I couldn't believe I'd been part of it. During the day, I went through the motions like a robot. Work, chores, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was stuck in this loop of guilt and self-loathing. I kept telling myself it was just a dumb story, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how deeply I betrayed her. One night, I sat in the living room with a beer in my hand, staring at the blank TV screen. I kept thinking about how I'd let my friends turn Elena into a joke, how I'd laughed along, even when part of me knew it was wrong, how I'd kept telling myself it didn't matter, that everyone overshares sometimes. But now, I couldn't stop thinking about how small and exposed she must have felt, sitting there at my sister's table, hearing her fear turned into dinner conversation. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I'd been lying to myself. It wasn't just a slip. It was me choosing to protect my own comfort over her trust. Every time I said it was harmless, I was really saying it wasn't that important to me, and that hurt more than anything else. Late one night, I finally got up the nerve to do something about it. I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a scrap of paper and started to write. It wasn't easy. My hand shook the whole time, and I had to stop a couple of times to rub my eyes, to catch my breath. I wrote about how I hadn't thought it through, how I'd let my need to be funny and liked get in the way of the person I was supposed to protect, how I saw now that what I'd done wasn't just a dumb story, it was a betrayal. I didn't try to excuse it or explain it away. I just wrote the truth, that I was sorry, and that I was finally seeing what she'd been trying to tell me all along. That I knew I'd broken something between us, and that I didn't expect forgiveness, only that she'd know I was finally owning up to it. When I was done, I stared at the letter for a long time. My eyes were blurry, my fingers cramped from gripping the pen so hard. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to pretend it didn't matter, but I knew I couldn't do that. This wasn't about making myself feel better. It was about telling her I finally saw what I'd done. I folded the paper and slipped it into an envelope. I thought about sliding it under her door, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was scared it was too little, too late. So I tucked it into my nightstand drawer and sat back down on the couch, staring out the window at the streetlights. That was the night I finally admitted to myself that the real reason I'd been so defensive, the real reason I'd kept saying it was no big deal, was because it was easier to believe that than to face the truth. Easier to protect my ego than to admit I'd hurt her. But I couldn't hide behind that anymore. I didn't know if the letter would fix anything, but at least it was a start. I sat there in the dark, listening to the faint sounds of her moving around upstairs. And for the first time, I let myself feel the weight of what I'd done. The silence between us wasn't just uncomfortable anymore. It was the space where trust used to be, and it was up to me to see if there was any way to rebuild it. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I finally decided to face it head on. The house was still, sunlight pouring through the curtains, and for a second, it almost felt normal. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the envelope in my hand, the apology letter I'd written days ago but hadn't been brave enough to give her. My palms were sweating. My stomach was in knots. I found Elena in the living room, sitting on the couch with a book open in her lap. She looked up when she saw me standing there, but she didn't smile. She just closed the book and waited. "Can I talk to you?" I asked. My voice cracked a little, but I didn't care. I sat down in the chair across from her and held out the envelope. "I wrote this for you. I don't expect you to forgive me. I need you to know how sorry I am." She took it, her fingers brushing mine for the briefest moment. I watched her slip the paper out and unfold it, her eyes moving slowly over the words. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. When she finished reading, she looked up at me, her eyes wet but her face calm. "You finally understand," she said softly. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "I do." I was so focused on trying to explain myself, to make it not seem like a big deal. But it was a big deal. It was yours, and I took it and made it into something cheap. I didn't protect you when I should have. I didn't even think about how small that would make you feel. She was quiet for a long moment. "Why now? Zach? Why did it take so long for you to see it?" I looked down at my hands, because I didn't want to admit I was wrong. I didn't want to face how much I'd hurt you. It was easier to tell myself it was harmless, that you were just overreacting. But I see it now. I was defensive because I was ashamed. I didn't want to be the guy who betrayed his wife's trust. But that's exactly who I was. I took a deep breath and met her eyes. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not even asking you to believe that things will go back to normal. I need you to know that I finally get it. And I'm not going to make excuses anymore." She stared at me for a moment, her jaw tightening. Then she sighed and set the letter down. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said quietly. "I can't just pretend this didn't happen." "I know," I said. My voice was hoarse. "And I'm not asking you to. I want you to know I'm done making this about me. I'm done defending myself. I'm done pretending it wasn't a betrayal." A flicker of something passed over her face. Relief. Maybe. Or maybe just the smallest crack in that wall she'd built between us. She sat back, wiping at her eyes. "I believe you mean it now," she said. "That's something." I nodded, feeling my chest loosen a little. "I'll keep proving it, however long it takes." She let out a slow breath. "Okay." Her voice was still guarded, but there was something softer in it now. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you, but I'm willing to see if you mean it." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. "Thank you," I whispered. We sat there for a long time, not saying anything else. The room was quiet, but it wasn't the same heavy silence that had been hanging over us for days. It felt like the first real step towards something better, something that wouldn't erase the past, but maybe, just maybe, could build a future that didn't carry the same hurt.